Good evening, and welcome back to The Weird and the Wonderful with Strange Bones. That's me. And we are going to dive into this next live with a quick completion of a couple of questions that came out on the last live, and then move into the next section following our usual modus operandi. So, good evening to everybody out there. I hope you are all warm and ready for a new live. As always, we are going to be following our usual pattern, and we will wait a few minutes to allow people to join in. Hopefully, we will get somebody. And having missed 2 whole days due to personal things that required doing. Lucky, welcome. Glad you could join in. Just waiting for a few more people to join in our general insanity. So, as we progress with what we do. But yeah, starting ourselves off, we unfortunately we had to miss a couple of days as I had to attend a wake, which was quite sad. And on the other day, I also had a few extra things that needed to be attended to, unfortunately, that kept me out and away from doing my usual lives. But I do apologize for that, and hopefully, at the very least, we will make up for it. So, just a little housekeeping. As you know, we only have one rule on the channel, which is to say that we insist that you are polite. You may agree, you may disagree, you may believe or disbelieve. The entire aim of the channel is just to share a few things and look at different and interesting things around the world as we take up our new topics, all of which will be weird and wonderful and supernatural and paranormal and all of that kind of strangeness, because that's what we do it for our amusement. But we do insist that there is politeness, and if anybody is disruptive or impolite, we will of course give them the immortal boot. Welcome to Soap and to Ghost and to Gabrielle de Ascensal. I do hope all of you will enjoy our topics. We are currently examining the topic of witches around the world. What were they? What are they? And this has proven to be quite a touchy topic for some. So we start off, as we always do, by reminding everybody that we do not promote it. We do not denigrate it. It is the belief of some and not of others. We have a great many people on this channel, some of which are believers and some of which are not. So we are just looking at all of the interesting things that may be of interest. But as we go, remember to like, share, subscribe, and do all the fun things to keep the channel going. And hey there to Big Daddy. I hope that you are having a fantastic evening. And with that, after the last live, we were looking at witches in England. And there were a few questions on that topic, which we are going to quickly finish off. So people were asking, what exactly did the older version of witches do that was anything different to what the modern version does? So in Anglo-Saxon times, individuals that were considered to be witches as such were generally what they referred to as cunning people, wise women, healers, and cunning men who practiced healing, divination, protections, and herbal remedies and charmed. By and large, they were the holy people of the pre-Christian world. So the Haigtese and the Bergruna describe them with having abilities such as communicating with the spirits and divining the future. So these were the main things. And the whole idea of witches being evil and making pacts with the devil only came in very much later. So the biggest difference is by and large the early version of the craft was with the spoken word for the most part, or religious ceremonies, and to a certain degree, the modern neo pagans are much the same, but it seems that for the most part, uh, proper spellcraft, as it were, the spoken spells, have fallen away to a certain degree. It's become a lot more ritualistic, and the use of enchantments and such has become more popular in the modern age, along with a great deal to do with the potions and things and the more ceremonial type magic, which by and large is much slower than the on the spot Galder magic. But it is also considered to be weaker than your ceremonial style Galdra magic, that is. So, what we could expect from the older witches would be herbs and other substances that were considered to have magical properties, were used to provide medical care, to ward off evil, to assist in childbirth, and much more. They were also used to divine things, both the future, lost objects, and so on and so forth. And we know for a fact that varying rune forms were often used. Uh, then charms, sigils, and little baggies of things that did stuff for you absolutely were very much used as well. And we need to understand that it was very much a theocentric form of witchcraft, which is to say that it was the pagan beliefs and folk traditions that were used, though in a number of places, more to the north and to the south of England, music played a large part. In certain areas, also the druidic practices, which was quite different, if you will. And there's a lot that has been lost that people are not so well versed in any longer. But again, things were seen differently. Now, later on, of course, the view of what a witch was moved from somebody who was essentially a form of priest or priestess into somebody that was particularly considered to be a maleficarium that would cause evil and was associated with the devil and cursing and such. So that really covers the English. And we see that there are a number of roots in the Anglo-Saxon viewpoints, which came across from the Germanic, and therefore we need to extend our interest and our examination across into what, properly speaking, we shouldn't say Germanic at all. Strictly speaking, we should say Chthonic. And the reason for that is within the areas that nowadays are separated into specific countries, it wasn't like that way back when. You had varying tribes. So what is now Germany was made up from a number of different tribes, some of which had influence and moved things along, if you will, up into the Nordic regions as well. So you will get a number of similarities which matter very greatly, especially if you're talking in the old rune law. And you will find that some of the pagan gods mentioned in the English lands, including Woden and Thunor, very obviously are a modernization, well, for the time, a modernization and changing of names of an even older tradition with the Nordic. We consider them the Nordic gods, but strictly speaking, they are absolutely the Chthonic gods. So within these lands, we find that not only were they the origin of a great deal of what we might consider the European witches in that regard, they were also where the epicenter of the witch craze occurred and the backlash against the pagan religions. And this is actually quite important to understand as well, because modern words that we use have, in fact, a very, very important old origin that explains a great deal, because when Christianity came across, it came across to the cities and it did not immediately spread to the countryside. So we have terms in the modern day like heathenry, but strictly speaking, a heathen literally meant somebody that lived in the rural areas out on the heath, as in not in the city. So it simply meant somebody that followed the old religions prior to Christianity. And it wasn't a specific religion at all. There were variants, which of course led to quite a bit of very interesting history, especially as you then move up from what the strictly speaking Germanic area up towards the Nordic tribes, as changes in society happened. And of course, this brings us to the next point that, thank you, Adam, that was very kind of you to send a few likes there. We know that as things moved across, it changed viewpoints. And when we talk of a witch, you have two views that are both incredibly important. The first one is the viewpoint of the practitioner, which is all very well and good, but it might even be in strict contrast to the viewpoints of society in general, or at least the official society, i.e., the ones enacting the laws, which matters very, very much. And this, of course, has led to quite a bit of conflict as well in history, which is quite interesting. So we will find that between the 15th and 17th century, of course, the witch craze absolutely did go nuts. And of course, it was from Germany that the witch hunting manual came in 1486, the Malleus Maleficarium, the hammer of witches. So there was a decently powerful shift in perception from them being folk healers and necessary parts of the community to devil worshipping heretics that were accused of diabolical conspiracies and blamed for all misfortunes and therefore needed to be executed. And I would dare say that it was in Germany that some of the harshest things happened in that regard. So we know that that was a serious issue. But part of the problem, of course, was that there were a number of quite significant periods of religious conflict. Which period and where? I'm going to take a guess, and I'm going to say the most were in the Germanic area. And it was definitely probably around the 16th century, but between the 15th and 17th. And interestingly enough, you say burnt, but almost no countries particularly went in for burning at all. Hanging was the preferred method for most, but not, interestingly enough, in the Germanic lands. There they did like burning. So there was different ways in different places and for different reasons in that regard. We know that there was a huge fight between the Lutheran Reformation and the Catholics, and thereafter the Counter Reformation. And of course, that just made things even more tense and led a great deal towards the desire to find and eliminate anything that was a threat to true religion in that regard. And when I say true religion, I am, of course, referring to what people thought was at the time, and that was, of course, also in dispute. We know that there was a number of quite severe times of famine and disease, and people looked for scapegoats. And witchcraft was definitely a convenient blamer. So things were no longer about worshipping the old gods and all about the fact that they worship the devil. Now, and here I'm going to possibly insult everybody equally, but bear in mind, I'm saying this from a very specific academic point of view here. You could argue that the difference between a priest and a witch is quite literally just the name. We call him a priest because he's a good guy, and still he works miracles. Endless thoughts. Hey, welcome, welcome, welcome. Lovely to have you. Sorry, by the way, that I missed the other 2 days. I had to deal with a wake for a deceased friend and varying other things. So it was very, very sad. And I was in no position to be doing lives on those nights, but I'm back. So, as I was saying, blaming mattered, and it had to do with understanding where you were going. Oh my word, we're having everybody important arrive to us. The Emperor's son as well. Welcome, welcome to you too, sir. So things moved in thought, and with the moving in thought, it definitely had a serious influence on who to blame and blame hard. So it became all about devils and controlling the weather and very much diabolical conspiracies against the proper political order, which we need to keep in mind was understood to be set in place by God Himself. So a threat to politics was a threat to God. Um, oh, well, good. Then you missed nothing, my dear. You missed nothing at all, and I'm very pleased to hear that. We've jumped, because we did the Anglo-Saxons and such in Britain, we've jumped across to Germany because it links, and we will eventually move our way up through to the Nordic versions as well, which is a point of my personal favorite, but we will get there. So it all does follow on to a certain logical way. And thank you for the heart. That is very, very kind of you. So as we know, one of the issues, which was a sort of fake way of justifying what was done, you had to have proof that a person was a witch in order to condemn them as a witch. So the Constitutio Criminalis Carolina of 1532 said you have to have proof, so they got it via torture. And of course, as you can probably imagine, that with sufficient torture, people will admit to anything. And that meant, of course, people admitted some seriously diabolical things, and that was enough to make everyone truly scared. And therefore, it meant a wonderful cycle of terror. So, yes, we know that there were a couple of major events that fueled this. And the first one to talk about was the Weissensteig witch trial. Now, this one, of course, happened between 1562 and 1563 and led to the execution of 67 women for sorcery. It was the first of the great trials in Germany, and the starting point of the actual European witch hunts. It inspired the popular book Of the Tricks of Demons, which were printed in 6 expanded editions in Latin between 62 and 83. That's 1562 and 1583, by the way. So it was quite a serious situation. It was even translated into French in 65, and so on and so forth, and then publicized by varying pamphlets, such as the one called The True and Horrifying Deeds of 63 Witches, which of course made everyone even more afraid, which meant that the Inquisition got away with even more. So by the mid-16th century, Weissensteig suffered from a lot of religious turmoil, war, severe hailstorms, and epidemics. And the ruler of the city, Count Ulrich von Helfenstein, started to blame the misfortunes of the city all on the witches. Your grandfather's grandparents came from Germany. Yes, you mentioned the other day. So this is a little bit of your history. You don't happen to know which area in Germany they came from? It sounds strongly to me that your surname is a touch on the Schwäbisch side, so that would be towards the south, I think. But I'm guessing. I'm not terribly clued up at all. So on the 3rd of August 1562, a very severe hailstorm hit the city, causing extensive damage. Within a couple of days, they arrested and accused several of witchcraft, an action which was met with great approval. 6 of the arrested were executed as witches, and they were made to confess through torture. A number of these claimed to have seen citizens of Esslingen at their Sabbath, and 3 further people were arrested in Esslingen but later released. Helfenstein was appalled by the lenience in Esslingen, and he executed another 41 just to make his point. and in 1562 December, he approved of the additional of 20 more. This amounted to the total reported in the rather sensational pamphlet of 1563. So 63 total witches and sorceresses, and they were indeed all burned at the stake, which was actually, as I say, a lot rarer than you might think. It was not generally considered the appropriate method of execution for witches. Hanging and drowning was preferred, but not in Germany. Now, there has been a number of debates about the actual religious convictions of Ulrich von Helfenstein. He was originally Catholic, but he was a Lutheran during the trial, and then he converted again to Catholicism in 1567. And of course, because he was the leader of the city, this meant that the city also went with him. And of course, after the Weissensteig trials, there were more. In 1583 with 25 executed, 1605 14, and 1611 5. So they were pretty enthusiastic in this regard. Würzburg was another one in the 17th century that was an epicenter for a lot of these things. So between 1626 and 1631, hundreds of people from the poor and powerless to members of the elite were accused, tortured, and executed for the crime of witchcraft. The peak period, as we said, was from 1400 to 1775, and they reckon that about 100,000 people were tried and maybe 50,000 executed, which goes to show that things were pretty harsh. Now, without necessarily putting the blame directly on these things, it certainly influenced the fact that in 1517 Martin Luther kicked off the Reformation, which were nailed to the door of All Saints Church in Wittenberg, and outright challenged the absolute authority of the Catholic Church, which led to a shocking religious divide. And this upheaval was massive. It really, we can't really fully understand how important it was today. And it led to even wars. So by 1555, the Peace of Augsburg, a treaty between the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and the Schmalkaldic League of Lutheran Princes, allowed the local rulers the freedom to choose between the two denominations. But it brought about some peace only. As you can imagine, it was pretty bad, and eventually all of this coalesced into the 30 Years' War in 1618. And it was an unholy mix of religious and political turf wars that it just went south fast and in very frightening ways. So this continuous warfare ended up with a lot of needing to blame type thing. And many of the so-called princes were also bishops. So they were not only secular leaders, they were church leaders. And as you can imagine, that this meant politics and religion were basically the same thing. There was no difference whatsoever. And people like Philipp Adolf von Ehrenberg were determined to eradicate heresy and consolidate their power. And that meant if you could have a good solid witch hunt, you could blame everybody for what was going bad, um, and show that you were doing something about it. And so the trial kicked off quite impressively. But their effects weren't what I would call a good thing. There was a definite sense that it caused more harm than good in many ways, and I suppose you could argue that it didn't last and they toppled, and now things are pretty much back where we were. The older German witches, though, who were they? So the old Gothonic name for them would have been Evolva. They were sort of seeresses or prophetesses, mostly female, who held very respected, authoritative positions in society, with them being oracles, healers, and leaders of resistance, even against the Roman rule. People like Veleda, Albruna, and Gana are mentioned in Roman accounts as being very powerful Germanic seeresses. Um, and the idea of them being a solitary, malevolent witch, uh, it was not a thing until much later when Christianization came in, when these traditions were suppressed. And uh, if you followed an old religion, you were considered to be evil. So things absolutely were very much about politics as well. We know that they were leaders, they were important religious figures, they were priestesses, and they wouldn't have considered themselves witches in the sense that many do consider it today, outside of the neo-pagan groups. Within the neo-pagan groups, an entirely new thing which we will get to as well, because it does matter. Because remember, it's viewpoints not only within the belief system but without as well. So they held serious power. They were important people, to the degree that they were remembered by outsiders looking in. Their connections and their practices didn't necessarily follow on through to the modern day, however, partly because of the change in viewpoint as to what a witch was, because of the changes in religion. So now, after the Christianization of the Germanic regions, all of the ancient practices were evil and kicked out. You basically worshipped the devil, you were bad, and therefore should be executed as fast as possible, because that's the best way to deal with things. And of course, the Malleus Maleficarium absolutely promoted that to a huge degree. And the problem was people were very, very superstitious. So it was easy to manipulate people. And of course, it did lead to a lot of problems. There are certain allegations that because people lost a lot of the old ways and the old ways of cleanliness, that was partly why a number of the plagues happened, which is possible as well, I suppose. So this changed in such ways as to inspire stories like the traditions of Hansel and Gretel, where the evil witch in the forest that eats children, and so on and so forth. So that absolutely did change things. But let's have a brief look at their origins. They were definitely people who could foretell future events. They were prophetesses in certain ways. They could perform other forms of sorcery. They were known as staff bearers, and it's interesting to note that the carrying of a staff is a sign of authority in so many different countries and cultures, and in so many different religions as well. So, absolutely an important point. So, the Volvas or Valas um, were the priestesses, really, that led the people. And having female leaders in this regard was actually quite common prior to the Christian era, where men took over. Now, they are spoken of as using wands, but we do need to keep in mind that our view of what a wand is these days is the Harry Potter wand type. Whereas back in the day, it could have been quite large, nearly as big as a staff. Um, they were considered to be quite different in a great many ways, and often made from specific woods for specific reasons as well. So we have also a great deal to do with the old Chthonic rune writing, because here again we see that words are the things that hold power. Most important, the knowledge of writing and reading, um, and the ability to actually put something down was considered immensely magical. And we know for a fact that reading was one skill completely separate to writing. Um, and in a great many ways, maybe 1 in 1,000 people could read and write. Um, Endless Thoughts, when you say you mostly have Christian values and traditions, are you asking about me personally or about how things go within the modern culture in Germany? Do explain a little further. We do know that in graves that have been excavated of varying sorceresses, there were wands, seeds with both hallucinogenic and aphrodisiac properties, and a number of other items that indicated a particularly high status. Societal beliefs were changed in certain ways almost by force. So this had quite a big influence. We know that uh, there's not a lot about how the early Germanic peoples referred to them because it wasn't often recorded. Um, no, absolutely not. I will not ignore the question. I will answer you in fact, I'll answer you before we get into the new bit on this. I would say there's quite a bit of Christian influence from my upbringing, yes, absolutely. But I have gone away from all of that to a certain degree. Um, I tend not to follow or support that kind of stuff anymore for a lot of my own reasons, um, which obviously on the live I won't answer, but if you would like, I will tell you more in the chats and what have you. But essentially, what happened was I've come to a tradition which is a new kind of thing for me, but which goes back to my old ancestry very much so. And by and large, it is not a theocentric tradition at all. Um, which means that it exists outside of religion or worship per se, simply because my view on deities has changed quite radically. Um, and as I've often told you on the varying lives, I think that it is our task in this world to not aim to be like any God at all, but to be as human as possible. And whatever may have happened prior to our life or what may happen after to our life is not something that we should waste our time thinking about. We should spend our time worrying about here, and perhaps in that way might become better people. Because as we often see, um, religions can strongly lead to a lot of horror. So that's my particular. There are roots in the Gothic for me because yes, half my family is indeed from the Gothic roots. I would suggest that your family comes a little further west than where mine would have. I suspect mine would be in the Gothic regions to that side of what is now France. It wouldn't have been then, it would have been Saxony. Um, but also, I have roots within the Gypsy um, traditions and a touch of Irish in there as well. But then I was born and raised in Africa, so I have certain African uh, influences there. Well, I think that I'm one of those stubborn and annoying bastards that if I were to ever find that there was somebody in charge of things around, I would go and give them a good solid kicking in that way because they have a lot to answer for. And yeah, there's quite a few Jehovah's Witnesses around here as well, as a matter of fact. I've had a few visits by a number of them who very, very much want to convert me to a better life. But unfortunately, given that I have a degree in philosophy and a degree in theology, um, they weren't quite up to my arguing, and I was a little bit mean, I will admit. Um, I'm not a good person to discuss religion with. I can get nasty at times. Um, and especially when I accuse them of not reading the original texts of the Bible, uh, and mere translations don't count. And when you basically open a fully Greek and Hebrew set of scriptures and only read it in the original and refuse to translate because that would ruin the meaning, um, it's quite nasty. But yes, see, this is the problem I have. Uh, a great many religions make people judgmental, and I believe that I'm not saying it is the fault of a deity, but it is certainly a thing that happens to humans. Perhaps we must blame humans for that, but it does happen, and I dislike it immensely, especially because it actually says in the original that you are forbidden, as one of the sort of main rules, not to ever judge. But that's the first thing we do. So there you go. Now we know the origins of the um, names that were possibly used on the few occasions that they were written of by outsiders who did write, because many of the locals didn't. They speak of Hele Rune, which also comes up in Old English, Helerun, which they translate as a witch or a seeress, but very clearly refers to the runes, to the speaking of the runes and the writing of the runes, such as the Helruna, the necromancer, and the Helrunari. So it's pretty clear that this goes back to that. Now, we know, of course, Hel was the goddess of the lands of the dead. So a Helruna literally refers to someone who can speak not only with the spirits, but with those who are dead as well. And I'm just going to make a quick clarification in that regard. Oh, thank you so much, Endless Thoughts. That's very sweet of you. I'm going to point out that we tend to think of a necromancer as somebody that raises the dead up and makes zombies and things, and this is absolutely not what a necromancer is. A necromancer is somebody who can speak with the dead. All of the different mancies are about communication, not about summoning or conjuring. So the modern view of what a necromancer is entirely wrong. A necromancer is a diviner, not a summoner or conjurer. That's a completely different thing. And by and large, for the most part, these witches would never have conjured or summoned. It's not within that style of magic at all. But Hel is absolutely the goddess of the dead. So somebody who can use the runes of the dead, the runic powers of the dead, the Helleruna, which makes a lot of sense. Some of them were also probably referred to as Hagar, from which we get the word hag. And Hagar meant somebody who was very skillful. So somebody who had the ability, and also we get the first hints towards one of what you referred to, Endless Thoughts, the enchantress, because one of the old words also used would have been something along the line of behak, which sort of means pleasure. So someone that was very pleasing. And then also something from haja, which was a wooded area, which is pretty much where we would get the English word hedge, but also the meaning of heathen, those who live out in the wooded areas. So within the old Chthonic laws, this is exactly the area where no, you see, you are completely wrong in that regard, Endless Thoughts. It wouldn't be in schools, quite literally, because most of the known world is almost forcibly Christianized in that regard. I mean, I know for a fact, and seeing as you mentioned the Jehovah's Witnesses, the area where I grew up was very, very strong Protestant Afrikaans. And there was one family there that was Jehovah's Witness, and they were borderline called a witch because they weren't proper Christians. So I would say absolutely not in that regard. We wouldn't have been taught at all. And by and large, most of what we call witchcraft is just the old religions, which is quite important. So we've changed religions. really. That's the main issue, more than anything else. So, what were um, these Chthonic witches? They were staff bearers. They were seeresses, Volva in that regard, and of course masters of Seder and Galder, which we will encounter again among the Nordic witches. But these are the two forms of magic. So a Volva is a staff bearer, a figure of authority, very much, who held the wands. And variations of these turn up right the way through the Chthonic regions and up into the Nordic areas all the time. So the Seder is one form of magic. You also had the Spakona, prophecy, a prophecy woman, really, and it refers to that they were spacking or speaking. Our modern English has taught you magic, it seems, so perhaps unknowingly we do know. We are taught to spell, we speak, and we are told it is wise to tell the truth. So the name of the Visindakona, the knowing woman, which in English came to be the cunning woman or cunning man. So we see that absolutely these go along. And that description fits to the forms of magic in almost every instance. They change which god happens to be the top one, but nevertheless, it is casting of spells by begging the gods to intercede on your behalf to do things. And yes, there is one thing about modern religions which I have a serious issue with, that we are supposed to almost celebrate being evil and pathetic. And I'm like, no, that is just so wrong. I am very against that. Uh, we embrace our sin with such certitude and power that it directs us to hate ourselves. So you have varying forms of magic. And as I say, the Seder is a doing of, which involves your medicines, your divinations, your prophesying, and all of that. But then you get the other side, the Galder, the spoken magic, the incantations, and of course, a lot of the old words referring to them was exactly that, the Galdekroner, the Galdekerling, the Galdrasnot. So a spell speaking lady or woman, in that regard. And of course, there were other names that turn up less so, but by and large, your Seder and Galder were the key forms. And of course, this goes back to the old views of things, involving the gods Loki, Odin, Thor, and more. And there are comments like that in the old poetic Eddas and the old Nordic writings, which affected a great deal and have come forward to the modern views as heathens. Why are there no proper schools for witchcraft? Well, actually, these days there are, and we shall get to that, because you can. You absolutely can. And in fact, the other day I came across the most fascinating book by Raymond Buckland, which is quite literally an entire course on how to learn the basics of being a Wiccan. So if Wiccan witchcraft was your thing, there is that. There are a couple of online universities where you can study it. I do know that if you are interested in such things. But the best modus operandi, it seems, is to find a current practitioner who will teach you further. And why can't you get a degree? Well, maybe one day you will, but I'm going to say that by and large, degrees are only worth the piece of paper they're written on. I've got a couple of them and they've done me no good whatsoever, whereas skill is quite a different thing. So, yes, you can learn from a practitioner if you so wish. And then you could become one of the many interesting things that referred to such things as witches, such as Scath, an ogress, a Flagth, or Geiger, or Fala, or Fordetha. And of course, there you start to see where the change of view happened from positive words into negative words, ogress and evildoer. But by and large, the original idea is that it was somewhat shamanic. Though the word obviously was never used there, that comes from the American Indians. It's that view, that idea. You'd be very surprised at how many people do believe in it and how many people are terrified of it. And the sheer number of comments I've had sent to me just talking about ghosts and witches, telling me what's going to happen to me and how I need to give myself to Jesus and more. So I think there's a lot more belief going around that people just don't want to admit to it. So maybe. So by calling something shamanic, we are referring to meditative, ecstatic viewpoints with specific rituals, generally using some form of chant, dance, or music, dealing with spiritual beings, and an effort to improve life in general, the use of the spoken magic to create things. And of course, this was quite literally the religion of society prior to, excuse me, excuse me, prior to Christianity coming in and taking over and banning all of that. So there was a definite change. There was a definite move from such things. And it was largely forced. So we know that by and large that there were different roles which were very important, and there were differences between the females and the males for reasons that largely had to do with society, importances within society. So very often sacrifices and things were the men's side, whereas the speaking of truth and divination were the women's side. Oh, come now. I'm sure somebody as sweet as you would never do something like that, Endless Thoughts. I can't imagine you falsely accusing anybody to just be nasty. And I strongly think that you would actually be much nicer. Now, we do know that there were a number of specific authors, not from the Chthonic lands, that wrote about them. We know that the legendary commander Munius Lupercus was sent along with presents to Veleda, an unmarried woman who enjoyed wide influence over the Bructeri tribe, and was a prophet, and in a certain sense also considered somewhat divine. Her prestige was sufficient that she controlled huge power and was paid greatly for it. And her prestige in this case was that she foretold that the Germans would encounter the Roman legions and would exterminate them. And in fact, they all were before Lupercus even reached her, proving she was right. So then, of course, you had Gana, who is mentioned by Cassius Dio in the 3rd century as part of the campaign east of the Rhine sent by the Emperor Domitian. And Gana belonged to a tribe called the Semnones, who were settled east of the river Elbe, and she appears to have been active in the first century and the second half of the 1st century after Veleda, and her political influence was sufficiently considerable that she actually got to visit Rome along with Masios, the king of her tribe, where they had an audience with the Roman emperor and were treated with huge honor. So it seems that this is definitely good. Well, I'm going to ask you this: was it the witches that were executed, or was it the ones people wanted to kick out? Because as it happens, those with any power simply disappeared and went into hiding. Maybe those who had the power were too powerful to find. It's an arguable point because there are still families of witches left around today. So maybe and maybe not. But you do need to be a staff bearer if you want to be a Chthonic witch. No staff, no power. That seems to be one of the most noted things. And of course, the ability to be a Halruner, where you had the ability to speak with what went beyond. However, this changed when things may or may not have changed the views of things, because back in the day, the powers were the Vanir and the Aesir, and that mattered. They were the powers, of course. And as we know, Odin and Thor were Aesir, whereas Loki was actually a Van, interestingly enough, which may or may not have something to do with their fights. How can you contact Hogwarts? I would love to know, to be honest. It would be nice. Now, after this time, there was a strong demonization of anything that wasn't Christian. And we see this in the Anglo-Saxon Leech book, from the 10th century, which was known as the Leech Book of Bald. A very, very difficult book to read, but a fascinating one if you're interested in Old English, what they called Wortkraft, which is to say herbal healing. Very, very good book on that, but a little weird. And in there is quite literally a prescription for a salve which will protect you against women with whom the devil has had sexual intercourse, which shows that this was very much against both witchcraft and, of course, against any power women might have politically. So it did matter. Now, where will you find these important texts? So I will tell you, seeing as you want to learn. You would need to find and read the old Nordic sagas and Gothonic sagas. So the Galsoris saga, the Hrolfs saga, the Kreka Landmannabok, and the Overodds saga, where you will learn about the Volva and prophecy. You will learn about the Haedir and the varying gods and goddesses. The Thorthjorg Ilitivolva, which is in the Elric Sagarauda, which tells you more about divinations and things like that, and possibly will give you information in that regard. And then the Landnamabok, where you will find out about varying important words that were used. But ultimately, it was all down to the old religions worshipping Odin and Thor and Skadi and no, not necessarily. They were called fictional by people who said that the Bible was the only truth. How do we know that they weren't the real stories? And in fact, the Bible is fiction. It's purely down to a matter of belief. In terms of proof, what proof is there? There's as much for one as for the other, to be fair. So to accuse these things of fictionalization is perhaps short-sighted in that regard. We know that there are records of belief. We know that there was a great deal that was said to be important, and we know that the origins of powers that we speak of still till today started in the Gothonic lands with the 4 or 5 forms of Berserker that had immense power and were absolutely a source of huge terror. So you had a number of warrior sort of shaman, some which were bear related, wolf related. There was one which was snake related or falcon related, sort of both. There was one which was boar, which is like a wild pig related. So that came out of that, on top of the Volva themselves and the use of Seder and Galder. Well, that is an opinion, of course. And in certain respects, I think you are correct. But whether or not that we created their very existence, I suppose, is arguable and a matter of faith. I personally have my opinions, which not everybody will agree with, but academically speaking. So we know that Seder is your shamanic sort of side to the powers. which did not include sacrifices, but did include herbs and divination and quite a lot of enchantments and things. And that was largely a woman's power, whereas the men's power was the galder, the spoken, and they, of course, did do sacrifices. So you've got two sides to magic, but it wasn't as hard and fast because certain people did use both. Um, Now there you see you've made a potion of magic beans that gives you life. Though you've got sugar in yours and I'm not allowed to have sugar in mine, which is a very sad thing. Diabetes is hell if you have a sweet tooth, believe me. So your Seder's balance is galder, which can be both song, charm, chant, or incantation. So galder is a spoken spell, but also a song. And we know that music mattered very, very much in these forms of magic. And of course, in the old Galderbok, which is the book of magic, it speaks of not only the Galder, but also the Galdas Misa, the objects used for magic, the Galdravel, the magical devices, the Galdrahithр, the magic storms, the Galdrastafr, the magical characters of writing, and of course, Valgaldra, which is a specific kind of Odenic necromancy. So, and the idea of being enchanted, as we say today, literally comes from the idea that I chanted to turn you mad. And this modern Swedish word crazy comes from that, gallen. It means having been chanted. I have enchanted you. And that's so in school we are taught spelling so that we spell correctly. And chanting is where the power comes, if only you remembered how. And of course, from this, we come to my favorite argument of all, because modern Wicca will tell you that the word warlock means an oath breaker. The idea of a werloge. So they call anyone that breaks the secrecy of witchcraft a warlock. And my view of it is completely different coming from this side. A warlock comes from the Chthonic word vadloka, meaning a spirit singer. And it is merely that the Wiccans wanted to blame somebody. They didn't know the truth, but we will let them off because they're modern, starting only in the 1960s. They're not old like the old style of magic. And all the Wiccans are so cross with me right now for saying that. And I think that's hilarious. So yes, you look at the old sagas and you realize that many of them are poetic. The ability to write in poetry was part of it. And the ability to bind things in, to lock them in, loka, to fasten. So a varloker lures or enchants the spirits, but also locks them in under the power of the seeress or summoner, securing them as protection against hostile entities. And in the Grogalder, the Utharloker, which is the norm of fate, Uthar's Loker is said to protect a person on all sides. Uthar's fastening, and they are bound to the individual that uses that spell. Um, so they are part of the Vorthlokker, which are warding spells. So you might also say that a Vardlokker is not only a spirit singer, but a Vartharlokker is a warding person, someone who creates protections in that regard. So we see that turning up along with, of course, the importance of the runes. And the earliest runes were 25, with 3 sets of 8 and the weird rune. So that was the beginning, what we refer to as the elder Futhark. Obviously, a Futhark is a set of staves, and it's called a Futhark rather than an alphabet, because an alphabet goes alpha, beta, A, B, and the Futhark goes Theo, Thorn, As, Rad, Ken, Gifu, Win. And then, of course, this then changed, becoming the younger Futhark when it came over to England, which expanded to 32 runes, which was quite different. Um, and they added on. But moving up to the Viking eras, when Christianity came in and locked it down, the problem was that the runes were not just writing, they encoded society itself. And in order to preserve society, they re-encoded it into 16 runes, which is now known as the Nordic Futhark. And they are basically 3 sets of 5 plus 1. So you have different numbers of runes depending on which version you follow, and the forms with which they are written is slightly different in each regard, and they refer to a full set of magic, a full set of rituals and all of that, a full set of crafts and tasks within society, a full set of ranks within society, and a full set of moves within combat with varying weapons in that regard as well. So there's a full martial arts based on the runes, as well as a political system, a healing system, a social system, and more. The runes were very, very important, and that is probably why anybody that had the power of the runes, that could read and write, were so damned important. And a lot of that was forcibly damaged by the enforced Christianization in that regard. So we see a lot of variations. You you see it in they're explaining how the world works, and the different lands that affect. So the primordial place from which the world sprang forth was the Ginnungagap, literally a space filled of magic. And on the varying runestones that have been found, it was the Gennarunar, the powerful runes that created the world and gave the gods their great power, the Ginneregin and the Ginheilgar, the great and holy ones that matter. So this power moved things along in that way. Thank you for that. And thank you to the Apple Man himself who has joined once more. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's always good to have you along, and welcome to Tyrese. So in that regard, the varying forms of magic are quite important. You use your staff or your wand, if you will, to direct your power and to bind in the spirits. So, thank you, thank you. So, this basically will give you what you need to start off in magic, and within it, they were carved with the gandraid, the magical powers of the wolf, the serpent, the animal forms, the totems, and so on. Um, and this is partly where we get the idea of a person riding a broomstick, because the staffs held the spirits of the animals, and these also would ride, as in possess, the animal form. So it was a misunderstood depiction that they rode their staff rode it like on a bike, as opposed to rode the powers, as it were. The meaning of the word ride has changed as well. So it has to do with working with the Gandir, the spirits, um, and you used your Gandr to bind, summon, and release the Gandir. And this is where the power comes from, which is quite different to how we often see it today. But of course, you had very interesting things, and here is some more learning for you, Endless Thoughts. If you want to learn this magic, you would need to learn the 9 herbs chants, the chants against the dwarfs, the Wisferstis, where you find the powers of Heglisson against the Aesir and the Ifa, the Alpha, Svat Alpha, and Lyos Alpha, and the power of Smith, and the presence of Valkyries. And these all tie in with understanding what these powers could do and what they were for. So prophecy was quite important, of course. You would have staffs, which really did matter. They would have special platforms on which they did their more public magic, which essentially seems to have been the equivalent of having your magic circle. So your side Hjalir, an incantation scaffold for performing magic on. What exactly they might have looked like is another question, but they had them. There were varying hallucinogens used, ecstatic experiences from magic mushrooms or from careful use of ergot fungus and such in order to contact beyond. Henbane was also very popular because it was a deliriant and it helps with deep meditations. It also contains scopolamine, which is quite a psychoactive drug when it's consumed as a tea. So it could also be made into a topical salve and rubbed into the skin, especially around the armpits and stuff, which are thin, which would allow you to connect to the powers beyond. So there are also, and here we go for you as well, a large number of the cannabis sativa that was used in order to connect to the spirits. So, a dream catcher. Are you worried at all about being caught by a skinwalker? You know that originally that's what the dream catchers were for. I think they're amazing. I've got about 10 of them around the house, some of which were handmade specially for me, so they're really, really nice. And I do like that, but mine are mostly little. Now, along with, what about cats? Well, weirdly enough, it is here that we find where cats come from connected to magic, besides the fact that they are very weird animals that seem to know a lot more than anyone else as well. We also know that Freya, who is one of the great ones for seeing the future and for magical practices, had a chariot that was drawn by cats. We know that Freya's dress was lambskin lined with catskin. We know that catskins were often used as mats by the cedar users. We know that Freya had a hood that was black lambskin lined with white catskin, and she had catskin gloves, which may or may not connect to the cat spirits that pull Freya's wagon. We know that in a number of graves of powerful women, they also did find staffs, cannabis, catskins, and carvings like wagons carved with 9 cats. 9 is very important numbers for the Nordic people. I used to have a lovely black cat. I do not anymore, alas, but there are 2 cats here where I live. One is a grey tabby who believes she owns me, and the other is an extremely naughty little black one with white paws that was supposed to be a cute female and turned out to be a very naughty male. And he is quite the laugh. 9, yes, 9 lives to cats, 9 powers, 9 realms to the world, ranging from Valhalla right down through Midgard to the Helheim. So yes, we will talk about the 9 realms when we get to the Nordic, of course. So by and large, there were a lot of important things that mattered, and this was largely destroyed once we got round to the Middle Ages and the witch trials and the burnings and more. But practitioners of Germanic heathenry today seek to revive the old ways, and going back to the old sorceresses and teachings of the Vala and the Volva are very, very important. So it's become a modern thing as much as it was an old thing. And while the beliefs come way back from the old beliefs in Odin, we see echoes in modern Catholicism, because even in church you sing the Psalms and chant. We know that the word witch comes from the Anglo-Saxon term, which today they say is Wicca, but isn't. It's pronounced witcha, which means knowledge. So to bewitch is to use enchantment upon someone, which comes with the same roots as the Old French chant and the Italian cantare, to sing or chant. So we know that songs mattered and poetry mattered and were part of the sorcery. By and large, very much before. There are no witches because the people that came to become the Afrikaners um, very, very much were hardcore Protestant and very, very much hardcore Protestant. Uh, they would in no way have anything to do with any of that when it started. And even still till today, there's a huge amount of resistance to anything outside of the Christian faith, that it's all bad and it's all witchcraft and devil worship. There's only one way to be. And that's one of the things which, on the positive side, has made the Afrikaner people so strong, is their very firm belief in a singular religion. It's kept them together as a people. So there can be great good that comes out of religion, but of course it can be quite a lot of bad in that it makes you very narrow-minded in that regard. Um, and you will find that, yes, we have witches in South Africa, like the Sangoma, and the Wiccans, the modern Wiccans, and of course, your Vaadlokker that have snuck in under the radar, like me. But you don't get very many among the Afrikaner at all. It's their whole ways of doing is quite against it, which may be good or may be bad, I suppose. We know that choirs and things have come out of that kind of magic and religion. So we've got a lot of things in Christianity that were taken bang from the old ways. We know that poetic incantations and poetry in general came from the Teutonic and the Celtic views of things, and by and large, in the old poetic Eddas, we know that our very language comes from that old understanding. The idea of being cunning comes from the old Anglo-Saxon word meaning to know, and a cunning man, which is basically a witch of a sort, comes exactly from that, the wise one. It comes from kenna, kenas, and all of that, kenning. The idea of knowing things in that way. So poetry and song is magic. It's kept on. They are the healers but weavers of spells and oracles, those that know and have power. The great tales, and we see it even in the old stories, like in the tales of King Arthur, where Merlin was the big advisor, and he was a wizard. Do we still have Tagati or Inyanga? Absolutely, we do. Not only do we have the Tagati and the Inyanga, we've also got the metalsmiths. I've met a couple. I used to have a friend who was a Isangoma who taught me quite a lot. It was very, very interesting. And I've known varied Inyanga as well. I've never met or interacted with one of the Tagati, but I've known of those accused of it, which may have something to do with that. We know that if you want to learn more, you need to read the Leech books. And if you want to know what a leech book is, the old word for a healer was a leech, leis, from Anglo-Saxon. And there are a couple still out there, but they're a bugger to read because it's written in Old English. So be warned. But huge amounts of stuff were recorded in that. The best one is definitely the Leech Book of Bald. which you would need to get your hands on if you want to know about English magic. It's a brilliantly written book by somebody who was only slightly biased. So there is that. And of course, this leads things on through till today, where we have modern versions. So your old wands were cunningly carved and very much varied from a full stick. Not always. Not always, endless thoughts. Not always used to accuse or harm someone in secret. Well, of course, an Inyanga is a good term in this country. They're healers. So to call someone an Inyanga means nothing. But to accuse somebody of abatagati is. There have been instances where people have been actually arrested for the criminal side of their activities, which included trade in body parts and murder. So there are absolutely still tagati to this day, and it's not only not so much. You see, your Isangoma deals with the spirits, and therefore their powers work via the spirits. So they can heal, yes, but through the spirits. Whereas you tend to find the Inyanga deals with plants and potions. So it's the other side of the thing. So both can be healers and intermediaries, but they use different methods, and it's the methodology that makes them importantly one thing or another in that regard. But yes, they can also do both. You are correct. And thank you so much for the likes there. Now, as we troll along, we need to mention briefly, because otherwise we won't know. So, what are the 9 realms? So, the world is made up, according to the belief, of 9 separate planes of existence, which include Asgard, Midgard, Jotunheim, and so on, all of which are connected by the world tree, Yggdrasil. So the tree goes through all of them in one great way. So right at the top, you have Asgard, the home of the Aesir. Then you have Midgard, the middle between all of these things, which is the world of humans. Now, you have on either side at varying levels Jotunheim, which is the realm of the giants, Vanaheim, the realm of the Vanir, Alfheim, the world of the elves, Nidvaler, the realm of the dwarfs. Now, just so you know, in Nordic version, the Nidvalid were the Svartalfa, and the Alpha are the elves. They're kind of the same thing, but with slightly, one is light and one is dark. You also have Nilfheim, which is the place of frost and ice and mist. Muspelheim, the realm of fire, and of course, right at the bottom, you have Helheim, which is the realm of the dead. So these different realms are the origins of different creatures, and also of different spirits. Now, this is almost mimicked, as we will find with the Buddhist idea, which also, in certain forms of Buddhism, there are levels of different planes. And this comes up in a number of different religions around the world. But those are the 9 realms of the Chthonic tribes, which very much does matter. Now, in the modern age, we also see that there is a change to how things go. And the modern German witches are largely neo-pagan and feminist figures who have rejected traditional religious dogma in favor of a stronger connection to nature and personal empowerment, challenging historical stereotypes that was said to be what a witch was, which was very, very negative in the 16th, 17th century. They're found in quite diverse settings, and Berlin apparently has a lot of these modern practitioners who engage in rituals, environmentalism, activism, and use the term witch a great deal. They want to be reclaiming it back as no longer being a demonized thing as in history, and it refers to a properly self-empowered woman. They are found right the way through of all stratas of society in Germany, and many of them will engage in their faith and practices very, very openly, which is unusual for a lot of places. Certainly in South Africa, we do not see it being done openly at all. So there is that. And yeah, they say Berlin has the highest density of witches these days in all of Central Europe. How to become a pagan practicing Wicca, neo-pagan, heathenry, and well, my advice for you is the first thing you need to do is read and master the book by Raymond Buckland. I will send you a link if you're interested. It's very readily available. I've seen second-hand copies of it all over the place. So the one that you want is Buckland's complete book of witchcraft, along with Buckland's book of spirit communications. The former was done in 1986, and the latter in 2004. A lot of people do see it as evil, especially in. It does not want me to pass the link. So the man is Raymond Buckland. Complete book of witchcraft. And he's one of the original Wiccans. And his complete book of spirit communication. And they are, as I say, they are very much Wicca. If you're interested in Wicca, if you want to find out more about Druidry and heathenry, there are other authors, but it does get very difficult to find good information on. Probably one of the best books, if you're interested in the old English Anglo-Saxon stuff, is by a man by the name of Brian Bates, and it's called The Way of Weird. And please note the spelling. It's very important. So yeah, that would be the works that will give you more insight into that. But there are a number of places where you can find out more, which probably will give you a good background in that regard. We know that these days, while a lot of people sort of think of magic as the Harry Potter stuff, it's absolutely not in the proper sense. And you will find that by and large, neo-paganism is definitely taking off. It is very much, in many countries, especially Germany, a feminist revolt against the patriarchy. Um, so there is that, if you want. Introduction. Who is it by? Because who it's by matters a great deal. Some people are awful. If it's by somebody called Silver Ravenwolf, take a match and set it on fire right now, and then scrub your eyeballs with soap, because I've never ever encountered a worse author. Ginny Messerell's not bad. She's okay. She's a little bit sparkly unicorn fart, but she's not bad. She's okay. Um, a reasonable source. I used to work in a bookshop, so I did quite a bit of research in what was out there and whether or not it was any good. Um, so avoid Silver Ravenwolf. Um, do read Raven Grimassi. Do read Buckland. Any of their books is great. Trying to think of the other fellow. There's a gay guy that's written some incredibly good books. I cannot remember his name now. All of his books are along the lines of the Temple of. So he's got the Temple of Inner Witchcraft, the Temple of Outer Witchcraft, but very, very good. Ginny's fine. She's one of the better ones. The good ones, by and large, tend to not be popular because they add the difficult parts. Whereas Silver Ravenwolf is all about being, yay! So she's a teenage girl's dream and quite vomit worthy. But there you go. She's popular. Not with me. You might have guessed. So the modern thing, which includes the men, we now refer to either as Germanic paganism or Germanic neo-paganism, but most oftenly as heathenry. And of course, you will now start seeing people wearing the symbol of Mjolnir, which seems to have become the symbol of the faith, even though Odin is the primary deity in that. So there is that. It doesn't have a unified theology. It is polytheistic. It involves varying cosmological views and gods from those things, and certain amount of animism to their views, a world imbued with spirits, and there are what they call blots, which are sacrificial rites where food and libations are offered, often accompanied by the symbol, the ceremonial toastings of the gods with alcoholic beverages. And some even will use the drugs for altered states of consciousness and visions. And the idea of not simply worshipping, but using Seder and Galder as well, which is quite important. Some will gather rather than be solitary, though you get both kinds. And if they gather, they meet at what is known as a kindred or hearth. And of course, we know that the word hearth comes from the place where the fire is built, where we would gather to eat, drink, and share life, which adds to a slightly romanticized version of the view of things, which may or may not be important. But then again, it's culture. And in many ways, one of the problems is the fight to reclaim culture, um, which is very, very important. Well, I must say you would enjoy the Anglo-Saxon version, who were very, very hard on their gods, and very much demanded answers instead of worshipped. We do know that a lot of heathenry is accused of being strongly racist, far right, white supremacist. But these days, one of the problems is anything that allows any white person or any man the slightest bit of pride is considered to be an ist or ism in some way. It seems that you're only allowed to have any pride in certain standpoints, which to me, again, is a load of shite. Just like the idea of cultural appropriation. Because if we're going to go down that rabbit hole, I guarantee you people will absolutely hate me. Because by and large, there is no such thing as cultural appropriation, just people being stupid. But that's my personal opinion. And we probably should not go further in that regard because it will make so many people upset with me. Um, but yes, you will absolutely, if you want to do any of these, have to learn the runes and learn to write them, to speak them, their names, their pronunciations, of which there's more than one for each, uh, and the varying other things. A number of people will tell you that heathenry is the old way, but I wonder if there isn't certain new influences as well. But that said, that's not a bad thing. Uh, Things do modify and move on and should. Um, we do grow, but you would then have to know more about Tyr, Odin, Thor, Frigg, Freya, and so on. And if you want the Anglo-Saxon version, it would be Thunor, Woden, and Yestre, and those kind. That's an argument, um, and one which has led to a great deal of trouble. They say that the most dangerous magic of all happens inside your head. And for that reason, there are a number of book burnings in history and so on. Um, so, yeah, I suppose it does vary. And some prefer specific deities, though they accept all of them. They would particularly try to emulate one or another, making them an Odensman, a Baldisman, or a Thorsman. I suppose it depends. We know that you would need to know about the weird, which is very, very important, especially among the Anglo-Saxons, which is the connection of things throughout. And it's incredibly difficult for most people to understand. But we have a little bit of an advantage in that some of the mindset among the African tribes here is not so far off as to the mindset when things were explained by the old Anglo-Saxons. So we at least have a living example to understand from to really quite catch what the weird is and what it means. Because words change, therefore, and we've lost the understanding of the meaning of fate and so on, and what exactly the orlog is and how it works. There are many important things going on that to explain, even in brief, would be almost impossible. The way of the sorcerer, by and large, in the Anglo-Saxon and in the Chthonic views, is the way of weird, the mastery of the weird, not to be swept up in the tides of fate as the common man, but rather to master it. Not that you can control it, but that, like a sailor tacking a sail to even swim against to sail against a tide, you can tack against the weird and move and sail against the flow of fate and thus control it, and therefore become not just a power, but a source of power, a sorcerer, and therefore you control more. But of course, to do so, you must pass the etc. to go out and experience the reforging of your soul skin, the varying shield skins that make up what you are on the anvil of the gods, to be forged out and remade in that regard, a kind of life and death. But yes, thank you so much for being with us. Have an absolutely wonderful evening. I'm going to close things off myself, my dear. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that, yeah, drop me a comment if you want to know more. I will gladly tell you more about it. More than we can say on a live, where we might get banned and beaten into strange shapes by politics and wokeness in that regard. So let me know. But until then, have a wonderful one. And I will see you on the morrow. And with that, we have come through to what is, by and large, the end of the Germanic side of things. We will definitely go further, more with the other areas as is appropriate, and see what else we can learn. But until then, of course, as we traverse the strange seas of the paranormal and supernatural, I shall bid you good night and sleep sweet, but sleep with one eye open, and keep that a holy symbol near at hand just in case, because you never know, those things that go bump in the night might just go bump for you. Good night.